A 16-year-old girl who lived in the same house as her parents and younger sister went to sleep in her room and was found dead in the morning. The police knew immediately that they were dealing with a murder, but no one had heard anything that night because of her relative. It took 31 years to finally solve this case, but no one was ready for such a turn of events. Fawn Koch was born on March 24, 1973, in Kansas City, Missouri. Her parents soon had 2 more daughters. The family lived in a small 2-story house located in a poor sleeping area. From an early age, she helped her parents take care of their younger children, regularly went to church, and was fond of swimming. When she was 16, Fawn took a job at a local amusement park. Her family was poor, and she was eager to earn some money in her free time. She spent most of the summer vacation of 1989 at work. She was mostly behind the counter selling tickets to the attractions. On July 26, she finished her shift around 10:00 on Wednesday. Her mom and her little sister picked her up in a car because it would take a long time to get from the park to home on public transport. Almost immediately after returning home, Fawn went to bed. The next morning, she had to go back to work. The girl slept on the 2nd floor. She had a separate room. Her sisters used to sleep next to her, but that night she was alone on the floor. Her sister Amber, who was only a year younger, was babysitting a family friend that night. The other sister, Felicia, decided to sleep on the ground floor because it was much cooler. It was a very hot night, and the working air conditioning was only downstairs. Their parents also slept on the ground floor. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, the whole family woke up to the sound of an alarm in Fawn's room. But for some reason, the girl did not turn it off. Then her younger sister and mother went up to her room, where they were waiting for a terrible sight. Fawn was lying on the bed with no signs of life. Bruises were visible on her neck. The girl also had no pulse, and her parents immediately called the ambulance, but they could not help her. Fawn was seen to have died a few hours ago. After examining her body, medical experts determined that the cause of death was strangulation. The girl was also subjected to violence. From the very first hours, the policemen realized that they would be very difficult to investigate. Although Fawn was killed in her room, in a small house with very poor noise, insulation, her parents and sister heard absolutely nothing. However, there was an explanation for this. The air conditioner on the 1st floor was old and worked very loud, covering any other noise in the house. The only oddity that night was noticed by Sister Fawn, and their poodle behaved alarmingly and barked, but this was not given much importance. This behavior was blamed on the fact that the dog was pregnant. After examining the crime scene, the police made several important discoveries. According to their version, the attackers, or a group of criminals, snuck into the house through a 2nd-floor window overlooking the backyard. An old trailer was parked near the house, on which it was possible to easily climb to the visor of the annex, located almost on a level with the window. The window itself was left open, as there was no air conditioning on the 2nd floor and had to deal with the heat somehow. In Fawn's room, experts found the first important clues: a few short hairs, small blood stains, and traces of semen on the sheets from her bed. All this was sent to the lab for analysis. In addition, several items were missing from the house, including radios, a Nintendo game console, and a stereo recorder. Several other items were found on the ground in front of the house. It looked like the robber threw them out the window to take them with him, but for some reason left them there. Detectives also discovered that various items were exhibited from the closet in the next room on the 2nd floor. According to them, the criminal was hiding in that closet, waiting for all the residents to fall asleep. Fawn's sisters used to sleep in that room, but not that night. For this reason, no one noticed the exhibit. The police managed to find another strange evidence. An old army cap was found in the Fawn room. All of her relatives stated that they had never seen the girl with this object, so the detectives assumed that the killer might have left the cap at the crime scene. Despite an impressive body of evidence, the police were unable to quickly identify the suspects. The problem is, back in '89, DNA was poorly tested and there was no common genetic basis. Detective Benjamin Caldwell, who was in charge of this case, came up with a basic version of what happened. In his opinion, the attackers could indeed have been several. and they must have been familiar with the house. Not only did they know how to get to the second floor in the pitch dark through the backyard, but they also had to know the location of the rooms. The next step of the police was to search for witnesses. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and relatives of Fawn, but all of this failed. The detectives had one big problem. The area in which this house was located was very poor and criminal. It had been difficult to bring various criminal groups to justice. A month after Fawn's murder, the case finally moved on. The police had a witness who pointed them to 3 suspects. This witness knew a number of important details that the police never advertised. Therefore, his story was taken seriously. These suspects were 3 teenagers, one of whom was a Fawn in the same class. They were arrested and interrogated, but the boys denied involvement in the murder. During a search of the house of one of them, the police found items stolen from the victim's room. It was enough to charge all 3 of them with murder. But here, too, the detectives were disappointed. First, the witness abruptly retracted his statement and stopped cooperating with the police. Second, the DNA from the hair, blood, and semen found at the crime scene did not match the suspects. In those years, experts could not yet determine the exact match of the sample, and all their tests showed questionable results. In other words, the analysis could not confirm either a full match or a guaranteed discrepancy. Despite this, the police were able to obtain useful information from one of the detainees. During one of the interviews, he confessed that he had actually broken into Fawn's house that night with the other guys and stole a few things. He described how he had made his way to the second floor through the visor of the canopy and even uncovered unknown detail. According to him, when he threw the tape recorder out the window, his pen fell off. The guy hid it under a bush nearby, and the police actually found it in the same place. But the young man quickly retracted his statement and no longer cooperated with the investigation, which would have prevented his confession from being used in court. Due to all this, the police had to let these people go, and the investigation again came to a standstill. Most likely, the witnesses were simply intimidated, but without their testimony, the trial had little chance. All we know is that one of them spent 8 months in prison for stealing items from the Fawn house. Since then, the case has been in a draw. Police only reopened the investigation at the beginning of the Zero, and the first thing they did was upload DNA from the crime scene to the CODIS database. It was created a few years before and contained DNA samples of people convicted of serious crime. Unfortunately, no match was found for Fawn's killer. This database is the result of major scientific progress in DNA research. It also allowed the police to reassemble DNA from the original 3 suspects and conduct more advanced tests. This time, the experts clearly established that the hair, semen, and blood did not belong to either of them. It was pretty weird, considering the suspect had Fawn's stuff. Detectives suggested that the 3 guys did rob her house that night, but there was another man with them. It was he who abused the girl and killed her. All this raised even more questions. I can't believe 4 perps just snuck into the house, killed Fawn, and just as quietly left the scene. The police still had no answer to this question. Since then, the case has once again stalled. Every year, the Fawn family grew less and less convinced that this murder would ever be solved. They continued to believe that the 3 suspects were at their home that night and may point to the killer, but they never will. The only thing that can help him to know the truth is a DNA sample stored in a police laboratory. Something interesting happened in 2018. Amber, Fawn's younger sister, gave some disturbing details about this crime. She presented her thoughts and facts to the unknown police at a popular American forum on unsolved crime. Over the 23 years of its existence, the forum has gained a very solid reputation, and its participants have helped the police solve several high-profile cases. Amber was verified and confirmed that she was really who she said she was. So her message deserves attention. According to her, the perpetrators had entered the house when Fawn's mother and younger daughter had gone to pick her up from work. Their father, who was at home at the time, was asleep. The criminals then hid in a closet in an empty room on the second floor and waited until everyone fell asleep. Amber also said that at least two of the perps knew Fawn personally. One of them went to school with her, and the other one met a girl in church a few days before the murder. Amber was there when they met, and she was sure the guy was interested in her sister romantically. She further concluded that the perps originally planned to kill Fawn, and the robbery was just a contributing factor. The police, on the other hand, believed that the perpetrators had entered the house for profit and had seen a sleeping girl, after which they decided to rape her. But why was Amber so sure that they were preparing to kill in advance? She said that robbing their house was simply pointless. The family lived in poverty and had nothing of value. But more interesting was the following fact. Amber told me that the perps used her younger sister's pajamas to strangle the Fawn in the next room. It meant that the attackers took her from that room in advance and hid in the closet to strangle the victim. If they hadn't planned the murder beforehand and stumbled upon Fawn during the robbery, there would have been no point in taking pajamas from the next room. Amber added that the perps also had to know their family's routines to get into the house undetected. She herself worked as a nanny from Monday to Friday and was only at home during the day. On weekends, the girls spent the night in the same room on the second floor through which the robbers snuck. Accordingly, criminals would be immediately seen. They also had to keep an eye on the house and wait for Fawn's mother and her younger sister to come pick her up from work. Despite all of this, Amber's story didn't bring the case any closer, but it was 2018 and the science of DNA had moved forward. Dozens or even hundreds of long-forgotten cases were solved thanks to a new tool of analysis. Fawn relatives saw all this and were angry. Why the police are in no hurry to reopen the murder investigation? They were in constant contact with the detectives on the case and got one answer each time. Extensive DNA research requires money, and the police have dozens of cases like this. For this reason, the relatives could only wait for their turn to receive funding. But they decided to take the initiative, and in 2019, they launched a fundraiser. The family wanted to cover the full cost of examining the DNA samples and offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrator. Due to the fact that the case was actively covered by the media and the relatives gave numerous interviews, many people responded to the requests for help. The family quickly raised the necessary amount, but there they were waiting for disappointment. The police department refused to initiate the study at the expense of the victim's relatives. The lead detective explained that in a situation like this, there's bound to be a big problem. If the relatives of one victim can pay for such tests and accelerate the results, then the same should apply to the hundreds of other families that have spent years looking for the perpetrators of the murder of their loved ones. And it's impossible to do this in practice because innovative DNA research is done by just a few laboratories in the world, and with this simultaneous influx of wanting their resources is not enough. The leading company in the region is Parabon Nanolabs. They've made tremendous progress with DNA, from finding human relatives with the smallest genetic specimens to creating an approximate portrait of the holder of DNA. This is the lab that was supposed to be looking at the samples that were left in Fawn's bedroom the night she was killed. The girl's relatives believed that the police were in no hurry to pursue their case for another reason. They were a poor family from a bad neighborhood, and killing there wasn't a priority for investigators. In an interview, Fawn said that if it were a case of murder of a family of wealthy or high-ranking individuals, all the necessary research would have been done instantly. Unfortunately, they did not manage to accelerate this process, and only by the end of 2020, there was a long-awaited breakthrough. But to this truth, the family was not ready. With financial support from the FBI, the police still sent samples from the Fawn room to the lab. There, they began a detailed study of the DNA and search for possible relatives of its owner. Most of the time, they were working on a semen sample found at the scene. In November 2020, they finally managed to find the person who owned this DNA. They were Fawn's cousin, Donald Koch. Of course, such news shocked the whole family. At the time of Fawn's death, Donald was 21 years old, and no one even thought about his possible involvement. Donald was a rather troubled man and constantly went to jail. He was tried for minor offences such as theft and possession of illegal substances. Unfortunately, in those years, such criminals had not yet been taken a DNA sample. Otherwise, the case would have been solved much earlier. Donald died of an overdose in 2006, but the police investigated his death because some circumstances seemed suspicious. It was because of this investigation that his DNA was preserved, but it was not entered into the FBI database because the man in the case was the victim, not the perpetrator. As soon as the experts informed the police of their discovery, they checked the sample against the cement found at the murder scene. We got a 100 match. Despite the severity of this discovery, Thorne's relatives received an answer to a question that had tormented them for 31 years. But there is one very important point in this story. A lot of evidence suggests that those 3 original suspects were also at Thorne's house that night. Now it was becoming clear how the criminals knew the family's home and routines so precisely. Donald was not a rare visitor and knew all these nuances. However, the police closed the case and no new charges were brought against the 3 men. Thorne's sister stated that she saw no point in getting them to confess, even though the men were present at the house that night. They may not even have witnessed the murder itself. Donald may well have been left alone in the house, and only after that attacked Thorne. Felicia added that these 3 suspects have already paid for their action. Throughout this time, when the case remained unsolved, the entire area was 100% certain of their guilt. Because of this, they were treated very negatively, with all the attendant consequences. According to Sister Thorne, their lives were in fact broken. Moreover, after the case had been closed, it had become clear that the police had initially learned of the suspects from the family of one of them. Relatives noticed the Nintendo among his belongings and remembered that it was the same one that was stolen from Thorne's house. This was said in the news, and every resident of the district already knew all the details. In any case, it is simply impossible to prove their guilt, and the relatives of the victim finally know the name of the killer. He lived 17 years without any punishment for what he did. And all this time, as if nothing had happened, communicated with the family. But in the end, the addiction to prohibited substances drove him to the grave, and he was no longer a threat to anyone. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, as well as do not forget to put like if the video you liked. Thank you for watching.